Hello everyone, Coach Tickety here, and today we're going to be looking at support counters for every hero in Overwatch 2. Now of course, since we're talking about supports, these are somewhat soft counters. These are not matchups in which you'll be winning duels against these heroes, but more so that you'll be able to take away from their win conditions and be able to help your team play against them effectively. And if you're looking for more educational content like this, or more guides to help you climb in your games of Overwatch 2, be sure to check out the GameLeap website. Over there you'll find hundreds of guides from professional Overwatch coaches detailing things like hero matchups, ability uses, map breakdowns, and so much more. Click this link to get your membership started and start improving your game. Starting in the tank line, we've got D.Va, and I'd recommend Mercy against her. Nothing that D.Va does can deny Mercy from finding value from her beams, either healing or damage boost. In addition, Mercy has tons of mobility to be able to keep up with whoever D.Va's targeting, or to just escape D.Va herself. D.Va also doesn't have any forms of crowd control, so Mercy should be able to find more reses against her than other tanks, and as long as you're not taking too much damage, shouldn't be threatened by her much at all. Next up is Doomfist, and I'd recommend Moira against him. You've got an easy escape tool in your Fade ability, which makes it easy to survive Doom's dive pressure, as well as your damage is low, but it is consistent, so you can easily harass Doomfist without worrying about charging up his power block. Try to keep up pressure on Doomfist by applying damage with your secondary fire, your damage orb, or even your ultimate so that he can't stay aggressive for very long. Next up, Junker Queen, and I'd recommend Ana. The Queen's lack of defensive resources or barriers or much mobility should make it easy for Ana to land either of her high priority cooldowns, her sleep dart, or her biotic grenade. Hitting either of these on Junker Queen should make her a very vulnerable target since she is one of the squishier tanks in the game, and for the anti-healing effect, that's just a double counter since it prevents Junker Queen from healing herself through her bleed passive. Look for opportunities to interrupt Junker Queen's ultimate Rampage with your sleep dart. This ultimate causes Junker Queen to stand perfectly still and then charge in a straight line, which should make it easy for you to line up those sleeps. Other than that, just make sure you're keeping your distance against Junker Queen and abuse any high grounds that you can to make this matchup as easy as possible. Next up is Orisa, and Zenyatta applies a surprising amount of pressure to her. Zenyatta's range and the lack of fall off from his projectiles should allow him to play very safely away from all of Orisa's threatening cooldowns. And in addition to just his damage, Discord Orb makes it very easy to make Orisa forcibly use her defensive cooldowns early, allowing her less time in the front line. Along with that, Transcendence can be used to save allies that are pulled in by Orisa's ultimate Terra Surge, but keep in mind that since it is one big chunk of burst damage, the healing from Transcendence won't save allies who stay inside the area of effect for too long. Next on the list is Ramattra, a very popular hero right now, and I'd recommend Lucio as a counter. Even just the passive effect of Lucio's speed aura makes it very difficult for Ramattra to get in and stay in range of you and your team. In addition to that, you can use your boop once he gets too close to make sure he's not following up with too many pummels. Ramattra's ultimate annihilation can definitely feel like there's really no counterplay available, but Lucio has a couple options here. You can try to amp speed and boop away Ramattra so that your team stays outside of his range and the ultimate ends sooner, or if you've got sound barrier available, you can look for an excuse to rush into Ramattra with your team and end his ultimate faster by just killing him. Moving on, we've got Reinhardt, and I'll recommend Baptiste as a counter. The AoE healing that Baptiste provides through his secondary fire and his ability Regenerative Burst should allow you and your team to survive from big damage from Reinhardt's hammer swings or his fire strikes. When countering bigger cooldowns, look to use your immortality field to save a target that's been pinned or to make sure your allies have the time to stand up after being earth shattered. On top of all of that, Baptiste's range and damage output allows him to safely poke at Rein's shield from a distance, and when using your ultimate amplification matrix, if you stack enough teammates behind it, you should be able to burn right through Rein's shield very quickly. And even still, you've also got Exo Boots, which you can use to escape Reinhardt by moving to high grounds where he can't follow, or using it to outplay Earth Shatter to make sure that you can still act and save your teammates with a well-timed immortality field. Alright, next up we've got Roadhog and our go-to counter, Ana. This is pretty straightforward that I'm sure most of you already know, but Roadhog is just a giant walking hitbox. This makes it very easy for Ana to find good value with her sleep dart and her nade very consistently. On top of that, since Roadhog relies so heavily on his self-healing from Take a Breather, Ana's biotic grenade should be able to shut down pretty much all of his aggression. Just don't forget that you don't need to use these cooldowns right away in this matchup. Let Roadhog get aggressive to make himself more vulnerable and then cancel out any hook opportunities with a well-timed sleep or a biotic grenade to punish him. And in the worst case scenario, you can even use your nano to save an ally who's already been hooked by Roadhog and even turn the aggression back onto him, allowing for a good team fight. Next up, Sigma, and I'll recommend Zenyatta to counter. counter. Zenyatta's long range should keep him far away from Sigma's threatening damage output, and since Sigma regularly takes down his shield in order to redeploy it, you should have plenty of opportunities to sneak in Discord orbs against him or any of his allies in the backline. And of course, it never hurts to have a big defensive ultimate like Transcendence available anytime Sigma's looking to hit your team with a Gravitic Flux. Here's a tip for that interaction though. Make sure you get a Discord out on Sigma while he's ulting before you go into trance and save your team. Sigma can't use any other abilities while he's ulting. He can only shoot his primary fire. This means that when you Discord him, he should be very vulnerable to any follow-up damage from your team, potentially even killing him during his ultimate, or at the very least leaving your team in a good position to rush into him after it's finished. Next up, Winston, and our counter, Brigitte. Brigitte's armor on herself and AoE healing procs from her Inspire should prevent Winston from finding much value from his damage anytime he goes for a dive near her. And while we're talking about denying dive, both Whip Shot and Shield Bash can prevent jump setups from Winston. You can even knock him out of his trajectory in mid-air with Whip Shot very effectively. But if he does manage to land near you, don't forget that your primary fire will go through barriers, allowing you to bully him as he's trying to shield dance around your teammates. And of course, both the knockbacks from your Whip Shot and Shield Bash can be used to knock Winston outside of the safety of his bubble, allowing for your team to follow up easily. When thinking about ultimates, Rally can be used aggressively to try and punish a Winston composition, especially if he doesn't have his jump available, or potentially as a counter to Primal, as long as you can keep your teammates in range. Next tank on the list is Wrecking Ball, and our counter will be Brigitte again. And this is for a lot of the same reasons as Winston. Your knockbacks provide a lot of counterplay to their dive setups. Look to punish Wrecking Ball's very predictable animations with his pile driver, since he'll be stationary both in midair and on the ground after he hits it. But even if you miss the Whip Shot, you can still put up your shield to block the knock up and damage from his pile driver, and then easily follow up with a Shield Bash to push him out of position so he can't follow up with damage of his own. And to make things even worse for Wrecking Ball, Brigitte also has an advantage when destroying his mines, since your Inspire will trigger every time you swing on one, allowing for more healing for you and your team. And rounding out the tank line, we have Zarya, and I'll recommend Lucio to counter her. Zarya has very easy to read and clearly defined advantage states around her bubbles and the amount of charge that she has available. If she's high charge and running at you with bubbles, use your speed boost to keep your team out of her range and get them to safety. However, when she's low on bubbles and maybe doesn't have as much charge, you can also use speed aggressively to try and punish her. And with no mobility in Zarya's kit, you can also force her into awkward situations with your boop by knocking her out of natural cover or away from her team. This can lead to an advantage by forcing her to panic use her bubbles, or if she's out of bubbles, maybe even net you a kill. And of course, when Zarya is looking to use her ultimate, there's no better counter in the game than a well-timed sound barrier. Alright, moving on to DPS, starting with Ashe, and I'll recommend Mercy against her. Again, please remember these are soft counters. I'm not suggesting that you pick Mercy and whip out your pistol trying to duel Ashe at every turn, but while playing Mercy in this matchup, you can try to avoid Ashe's LOS by using the flexibility of her positioning and beam to stay out of threatening sightlines. Since Ashe is so threatening on her own with such strong burst and AoE damage from her dynamite, you should be looking to give your DPS an advantage when fighting her at range, either by keeping them healthy through all of Ashe's damage, or by catching Ashe herself off guard by adding extra damage to their kits with your damage boost. Valkyrie might not be the most game-changing ultimate in the game, but it can definitely help your team stabilize after a big dynamite play, or when Ashe uses Bob. You can also use it aggressively to try and help your team close the distance on long-range members like Ashe. Next up, Bastion and Ana to counter. Both Sleep Dart and Biotic Grenade can be used to deny a lot of value from Bastion's sentry form, making him more vulnerable or just stopping him from shooting altogether. Ana's kit should allow her to play a safe distance away from Bastion's effective range from all the damage he spews out, and a well-timed nano boost on a teammate can help them survive through Bastion's attacks, as well as present an opportunity for them to turn and kill him even through his damage reduction. Next, we've got Cassidy and Kiriko to counter. Both your teleport and your protection Suzu can help you survive a lot of Cassidy's pressure from his primary fire and of course from his magnetic grenade, or they can be used aggressively to help a teammate win a duel against him. Since your kunai projectiles don't suffer from fall-off damage, but Cassidy's hit scan weapon does, you can just look to keep him at arm's length whenever you're fighting. It might be a bit harder to land your shots this way, but at least you'll be staying safe. When using your ultimate Kitsune Rush, try to pinpoint Cassidy as a target. Cassidy players tend to gravitate towards the front line in order to make it easier to find magnetic grenade kills, and since he basically has no mobility in his kit, he should be very vulnerable to a Kitsune Rush all-in. Next up is Echo, and we've got Baptiste as a counter. Baptiste's hit scan weapon should allow him to easily poke out Echo while she's flying around in midair. His AoE healing from his secondary fire is great for healing up any poke damage across your teammates, but when looking to deny Echo's assassination attempts, make sure we're using the regenerative burst anytime an ally falls below 50%. Keep in mind that Echo's focusing beam also triggers whenever allies are below 50%, so you want to keep them above that threshold whenever possible. And in any emergency situations, you've also got your immortality field to help you as well. Anytime Echo is looking to use her ultimate duplicate aggressively, you can usually counter that with a well-timed amp matrix. You'll want to use it as Echo is changing into her new hero, since it takes her some time to build up that new ultimate and actually find value from the duplicate. Use the bonus damage you get from the amp matrix to burn Echo through her copy and render her ultimate useless. Next up is Genji, and I'll recommend Moira to counter him. And I get what you're probably thinking, Zenyatta or Lucio would be much better counters for Genji's ultimate Dragon Blade, but I think Moira does a lot in this matchup as well. Moira's damage will go through deflect and is very safe to go for, since you can either just throw a damage orb in at range or rely on your fade anytime you get too close. This makes it very frustrating for a Genji player to try and approach when Moira's tracking him the whole way through, leaving him unable to follow up on aggressive options. Genji can use his deflect on your orbs as Moira, but it's generally not something he wants to do, since he relies very heavily on that cooldown in an extended engagement. And while your Coalescence won't counter Genji's blade, at least not the same way that Lucio's Sound Barrier or Zenyatta's Transcendence will, it will still apply a lot of pressure and should charge relatively fast compared to Genji's blade. This should lead to situations where you have a Coalescence available before Genji's looking to blade, and when using this aggressively, you should be targeting Genji in order to force his cooldowns and leaving him in an awkward situation once the ultimate's over. Next DPS on the list is Hanzo, and our go-to counter will be Kiriko. Kiriko's mobility should allow you to keep up with Hanzo's positions. You can wall climb all the same walls that he can, or you can use it to mix up your position when looking to duel him, catching him off guard on the flank. If you are looking to push Hanzo aggressively and trying to take him in a duel, make sure you're waiting out his Storm Arrow cooldown. That ability makes him significantly stronger in close range and can very quickly lead to you going back to the spawn room. And if you are looking to play aggressively like this, make sure you save your TP so you can get out defensively once the fight turns in the enemy's favor. And if nothing else, Hanzo also makes for a pretty vulnerable, like an assassination attempt from Junkrat, or when he's using his Riptire, you've got your Immortality Field. If you reason this is a real counter, Kiriko has her Suzu available to cleanse any and all slowing or TP angles. Be very careful about booping him during his ultimate, since you might be sending him on Lucio as a counter again. Not many characters in the game can keep up with Sojourn's mobility paired with yourself if you're looking to take a duel, since you can be very hard to hit while wall riding. And if Sojourn is looking to pop up, you can technically outrange Soldier since your projectiles don't suffer from fall off damage, but it can be very differently longer range than Symmetra, which can allow you to harass her in the front line without taking any damage yourself. But if she does get too close, or if you notice her setting up a TP play, you've also got Fade to get yourself to safety. When Symmetra uses her ultimate, the giant shield wall that can be very difficult to deal with, Moira has no problem with her Coalescence healing allies on both sides and dealing damage to enemies who are trying to push in. Just watch out for Sim's turrets in this matchup, since Moira's damage isn't great at destroying them. Next up, Torbjorn, and I'll recommend Lucio to counter. Lucio's primary fire shoots ranged projectiles, which are great for destroying Torbjorn's turret, and without his turret up, Torbjorn will usually struggle against a Lucio since it can be difficult to land his projectiles when Lucio is wall riding all over the place. And of course, we've got Speed Boost and Sound Barrier to counter ultimates like Molten Core, or even just to punish Torbjorn when you catch him without his overload cooldown. Next up is Tracer and Brigitte to counter. While it doesn't offer much health, Brig's shield is great at denying short bursts of damage, such as from Tracer's pulse pistols or even her pulse bomb. Look to catch Tracer when she's trying to commit into a fight, since that'll bring her into close range, allowing you to proc your Inspire for you and your teammates. And if you catch her while she's setting up or approaching a fight, you can try to hit her with a whip shot, which might force her to waste some of her blinks. You probably won't be finding a kill in this matchup, but you can deny most of Tracer's damage, if not heal it right back up with your Inspire. And good Tracer players will know to keep their distance against a Brigitte, so if you notice this happening, don't be afraid to use your shield bash just to close the distance on them and start swinging or throwing whip shots at them. Our final DPS on the list, we've got Widowmaker and Lucio as a counter. And this might be the one support matchup on this entire list where I could even encourage you to take the duel and expect to come out ahead. Use Lucio's speed and mobility from his wall ride to close the distance on Widowmaker's positions and catch her off guard with slight flank angles when she's scoped in. If you can get a good burst of damage off before she's able to react, you can usually continue chasing her for the kill. But if she's really too far away, or you'd rather play more for your team, even just having passive speed can make it difficult for Widowmaker to line up headshots, since you'll be spending less time in open space. If Widow is proving to be a real problem for your team, however, I would definitely recommend trying to apply some of that pressure yourself. And finally, rounding out our list, we've got our supports, starting with Ana and Kiriko to counter. This one's obvious, right? Do I need to say it? Suzu's great for countering anti-healing effects that Ana provides more than anyone else. On top of that, Kiriko can dish out significantly more damage than Ana can usually, and doing this to Ana herself can force her to play defensively and maybe even waste her cooldowns. And make sure that you're using Ana's range against her. She'll usually find herself all bundled up in the backline trying to stay scoped in and support her teammates, whereas Kiriko can punish this by using mobility and flank routes to approach her and catch her off guard. Since Ana will dish out generally more healing and Kiriko will dish out generally more damage, you'll need to get aggressive in some way or another in order to get advantage. Next up, Baptiste and Ana to counter. While Baptiste might put out more healing numbers, Ana's healing is more precise, allowing you to play longer ranges and generally safer positions. And when you see enemies grouped up trying to benefit from Baptiste's kit, either hiding underneath his immortality field or grouped up behind his ultimate, you can usually look for strong anti-grenade value there, since you'll be able to hit multiple enemies and completely deny all of Bap's healing. Moving on, Brigitte and Mercy to counter. Mercy wins this matchup by basically never interacting with Brigitte thanks to her mobility. Mercy's value should be somewhat free here, since you'll rarely be threatened by Brigitte, and you can use this to damage boost your teammates more often, allowing them to overwhelm Brigitte in the front line, since she doesn't really dish out much healing. On top of that, Mercy's ultimate Valkyrie is much easier to use than Brigitte's Rally. You're able to stay safer yourself, you're able to apply your healing and damage boost a lot more consistently and generally for a longer period of time. If you find yourself matching ultimates with an enemy Brigitte, you should expect your team to at the very least keep up, if not start winning in pressure. The only thing to really watch out for in this matchup is Brigitte's multiple knockbacks that can be used to interrupt your res attempts, so keep that in mind. Next up, we've got Kiriko and Zenyatta as our go-to counter. Zen's got much more consistent damage at range, which should allow for more consistent pressure in the front line for Zenyatta's team, as long as you're watching out for Kiriko's headshots. And applying Discord to your targets can make it very difficult for Kiriko to keep up with healing and might force her to use her Suzu early. Your Transcendence can be a great counter to Kiriko's ultimate Kitsune Rush, but keep in mind that it doesn't last nearly as long as Kitsune Rush does. Make sure you're not using it immediately when this ult comes out, but try to save it for the most opportune moment during the Kiriko Rush. However, if you do use your trance too early and the Kitsune Rush is going to outlast it, make sure you get yourself to a safe position before the trance is over. Moving on to Lucio and Moira to counter. The lock-on nature of Moira's damage from both her secondary fire and her orbs can make it very easy to harass Lucio even as he's wall riding all around the map. Try to lean on your damage output as much as you can get away with Moira in this matchup, since you'll want to build your ultimate much quicker than Lucio's sound barrier. If done correctly, this can lead to you building nearly twice as many ults as the opposing Lucio over the course of a game. And of course, Moira's Fade is one of the most flexible defensive cooldowns in the game and can be used to get yourself out of nearly any situation, including getting rushed on by a Lucio composition. Next up is Mercy and Zenyatta to counter. Your Discord and projectiles can help your DPS threaten Mercy from range or her pocket target, whichever is more available, as well as charging up your secondary is very useful whenever you see Mercy going for a res for an easy kill lineup. Or if you happen to be close enough, you can also just kick her out of it. Moving on to Moira and Ana to counter. While not many people can really punish a Moira player, Ana has better tools than most of the cast. Moira dishes out a lot of healing, but she generally does so from short range. This can lead to Ana finding easy anti-healing grenades, as well as denying the majority of Moira's kit, potentially even forcing her to use her Fade early. Additionally, Moira's ultimate Coalescence can be countered by either of Ana's big cooldowns. A Sleep Dart will cancel the effect entirely, or an anti-healing grenade will cause Moira to become much more vulnerable since she can't use her Fade while she's ulting. And finally, the last member on our list, we've got Zenyatta and Ana once again as a counter. There's the obvious stuff here. Your anti-healing grenade is a fantastic and one of the only counters to Zenyatta's Transcendence, but even when fighting him you can find some advantages. His lack of mobility or any real cooldowns makes him an easy target at range for Ana, as long as you're watching out for his projectiles. Use your no fall off hit scan rounds to your advantage and poke him out so that he has to play safer and can't apply as many Discord orbs to your team. Just make sure you're not standing still for too long while scoped in, since Zenyatta can line up an easy secondary fire to one-shot you from range. Thank you guys so much for watching. Let me know what you think. Are these counters something you're going to try in your new games? Are there some counters we didn't talk about in this video? Let me know down in the comments below. And if you're looking for more educational content like this, or more guides to help you climb in your games of Overwatch 2, be sure to check out the GameLeap website. Over there you'll find hundreds of guides from professional Overwatch coaches detailing things like hero matchups, ability uses, map breakdowns, and so much more. Click this link to get your membership started and start improving your game.